In a decision that's reverberating worldwide, the United States Supreme Court has delivered a verdict that will be discussed for generations to come. The ruling has sent shockwaves through legal, political, and economic circles, both in the U.S. and across the globe. The court has struck down the Trump administration's sweeping tariffs, which had been a cornerstone of its economic policy. These tariffs, imposed on a wide range of imported goods, were intended to protect American industries but sparked intense debate and controversy. In a historic decision, the justices ruled that the tariffs represented an unconstitutional overreach of executive power, emphasizing the importance of checks and balances in the American system. The verdict brings an end to years of legal battles waged by small businesses, state governments, and advocacy groups, all of whom argued that the tariffs were damaging and unfair. This decision sets a powerful new precedent for the limits of presidential authority, especially when it comes to shaping economic policy without congressional approval. The case directly challenged the foundation of Trump's tariff strategy, which imposed import taxes on billions of dollars worth of goods from countries like China and Mexico. The administration claimed these measures would protect American jobs and industries, but critics saw them as harmful and unlawful. Opponents argued that these tariffs amounted to illegal taxes imposed without the consent of Congress, a violation of the Constitution's separation of powers. Today, the Supreme Court sided with those critics, fundamentally reshaping the landscape of American trade policy and setting a legal standard that will influence future administrations. Financial markets are already reacting to the news, with stocks fluctuating and investors scrambling to understand the broader implications for global trade. Business leaders across the country are holding emergency meetings, trying to assess the immediate fallout and what this means for their companies' bottom lines. There are also growing questions about whether companies and consumers might be eligible for refunds on tariffs already paid, adding another layer of uncertainty. The future of U.S. trade agreements is now in flux, as negotiators and foreign governments watch closely to see how America's approach to international commerce will evolve. Ultimately, this ruling is more than just a legal decision. It marks a pivotal moment that redefines the balance of power in American governance, and its impact will be felt for years to come. To truly grasp the impact of today's Supreme Court ruling, it's important to understand the history and context behind the Trump tariffs, a policy shift that has shaped the economic and political landscape over the past several years. Let's revisit the origins of these tariffs and how they came to play such a pivotal role in U.S. trade policy. In 2018, the Trump administration made a dramatic break from decades of bipartisan support for free trade. The White House imposed sweeping tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of imports, targeting what it described as unfair trade practices by countries like China, and aiming to address long-standing trade imbalances. The administration's stated goal was to make foreign imports more expensive, thereby encouraging Americans to buy domestically produced goods, revitalize U.S. manufacturing, and protect American jobs from overseas competition. At the same time, the tariffs were intended to pressure America's trading partners into negotiating new, more favorable trade agreements, and to send a message that the U.S. would no longer tolerate what it saw as economic exploitation. Legally, the administration relied on the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, a law originally designed to address national security threats, not trade disputes. By invoking IEPA, the Trump administration controversially bypassed Congress, asserting broad executive authority to reshape trade policy without legislative approval, a move that sparked intense debate in Washington and beyond. Critics from both political parties warned that these tariffs would ultimately backfire, raising costs for American businesses and consumers, disrupting supply chains, and provoking retaliatory tariffs from other countries. Protests and public outcry soon followed, as the real-world effects became clear. As prices climbed and export markets dried up, American farmers, manufacturers, and small business owners bore the brunt of the fallout. Many faced financial hardship, leading to a wave of lawsuits that challenged the administration's authority and set the stage for today's landmark decision. Ultimately, the legal battle was about much more than just economics. At its core, it questioned whether the president could unilaterally sidestep Congress to fundamentally reshape U.S. trade policy, an issue with profound implications for the balance of power in American government. The legal battle against the tariffs began with small businesses, industry groups, and states arguing the president had overstepped constitutional bounds. They claimed the Constitution gives Congress, not the president, the power to tax and regulate commerce, and that IEPA was never meant for sweeping tariffs. The government countered that the president needed broad authority to address economic threats, especially from countries like China. Lower courts sided with the challengers, ruling that only Congress can impose such taxes. This set the stage for a Supreme Court showdown over billions in tariffs and the limits of presidential power. The outcome would determine not just trade policy, but the future of executive authority in America. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court struck down the Trump-era tariffs, declaring the president cannot use IEPA to impose broad, nationwide taxes. Chief Justice Roberts wrote that while the president has power in foreign policy, Congress alone can levy taxes and duties. The court distinguished between targeted sanctions and sweeping tariffs, emphasizing that major economic policies require explicit congressional approval. Dissenting justices warned this limits the president's ability to respond to global threats, but the majority insisted the Constitution draws a clear line. Effective immediately, the tariffs must end, and future presidents are barred from using IEPA as a backdoor for protectionist trade agendas. The ruling reasserts Congress's central role in economic policy and sets a new standard for executive power. The Supreme Court's decision has unleashed immediate economic consequences. The government now faces refunding hundreds of billions in tariffs collected since 2018, a fiscal shock that could spark new political battles. For businesses, the ruling offers hope of relief and potential refunds, though the process will be complex and slow. Trading partners like China and the EU may see this as vindication, possibly easing trade tensions and opening markets for U.S. exporters. But not everyone benefits. Industries like steel and aluminum, once shielded by tariffs, now face tougher competition from imports. The sudden policy shift creates new winners and losers, highlighting the unpredictable effects of trade policy. As the dust settles, the U.S. must navigate a changed economic landscape. The verdict is a reset button for American trade. The political shockwave from the Supreme Court's decision is reshaping Washington. The ruling is a clear check on executive power, restoring Congress's authority over trade and taxation. Lawmakers now face pressure to actively shape U.S. trade policy, sparking debates and demanding bipartisan cooperation. For the presidency, a powerful tool is gone. Future administrations must work with Congress or find new legal avenues for economic action. The decision will echo through election cycles, forcing candidates to define their vision for America's economic future. Some hail the verdict as a win for the rule of law, others see it as a blow to U.S. leverage abroad. Either way, the era of unilateral presidential tariffs is over. The next chapter in trade policy will be written in Congress. Legal and trade experts are meticulously dissecting the recent Supreme Court's ruling, delving into its far-reaching implications for both domestic and international policy frameworks. Constitutional scholars are emphasizing the decision's reinforcement of the non-delegation doctrine, a principle that underscores Congress's inability to hand off its core powers, particularly the crucial power to tax. This decision is seen as a pivotal moment in reaffirming the separation of powers. Trade specialists are raising alarms that the ruling creates a significant policy vacuum. They stress that Congress must now step up to fill this void, or risk a paralysis in trade negotiations that could have long-term consequences for the nation's economic health. Analysts are noting the court's clear message that emergency powers have definitive limits. They argue that economic emergencies, no matter how severe, cannot justify the imposition of nationwide taxes without proper legislative backing. Some experts express concern that the decision might weaken the president's hand in global affairs, arguing that the ability to take swift economic action is vital in today's highly competitive world. They fear this could hinder the U.S. ability to respond quickly to international economic challenges. Conversely, others view it as a triumph for the rule of law, celebrating it as a necessary check on potential executive overreach. They argue that this decision restores a balance that is essential for a functioning democracy. The debate surrounding this ruling is far from over, with legal experts and policymakers continuing to discuss its implications. However, one thing is abundantly clear. The balance of power in trade policy has shifted significantly. The U.S. must now navigate this new landscape and find a way forward that respects the court's decision while ensuring effective governance and economic stability. With the Supreme Court's ruling, the U.S. faces a new era in trade policy. The immediate challenge ending tariff collections and processing massive refunds, a logistical and political test for Congress and federal agencies. Diplomatically, the administration must reset relations with trading partners, seeking to roll back retaliatory tariffs and reopen markets. Congress now bears responsibility for defining future trade policy, likely igniting fierce debates between protectionists and free traders. Lawmakers must also consider new ways to support American workers and industries in a globalized economy. The court's decision doesn't solve these challenges, it just changes who must address them. America stands at a crossroads, needing leadership and compromise to chart a sustainable path. The next steps will shape the nation's role in the world for years to come. Today's Supreme Court decision is a defining moment for American democracy. By striking down the tariffs, the court reaffirmed the separation of powers and the resilience of U.S. legal institutions. The ruling forces a national reckoning with how America engages the world and who decides its economic future. The anxieties that fueled the tariff strategy remain, but now Congress, and the American people, must find new answers. This is an invitation for citizens and leaders to shape a trade policy that is both effective and constitutional. The legacy of this verdict depends on what comes next: new laws, new debates, and a new consensus. The court has done its job. Now it's up to the nation to write the next chapter. The story of American trade and democracy continues.